Playing tempo in TFT is probably one of the most intuitive ways to approach the game, but it's also one of the most difficult ways to actually execute a game when it comes to playing TFT the higher you climb up the ranks. And in today's video, we're going to go over exactly what it means to actually tempo in TFT, or in more colloquial terms, what does it mean to be a tempo Timmy? Well, first off, let's actually define what is tempo. Tempo, when we're talking about it in this context of a lobby, is how quickly people are losing HP throughout the lobby. Generally speaking, the higher you climb, the higher the tempo is in the lobby. People are more efficient at building better boards the higher you climb up the ranks. Therefore, the tempo is higher when you approach ranks like Diamond Masters, Grandmasters, Challenger, etc. Now, that being said though, tempo relies on 6 different things if you want to be able to play tempo, aka build boards that are super strong very early. These are the 6, in my opinion, core pillars when it comes to actually developing your tempo early. First off is knowing your line selection. You should know exactly where to end when it comes to playing a tempo line. Generally speaking, you don't really want to too often try to tempo and then figure it out later. Generally speaking, there's more to the madness than what it seems. You typically, especially in Challenger, you kind of know that you're going to tempo from your current 2-1 spot into some sort of 4-cost standard board that you know you're going to want to end up on, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we actually determine those kind of factors. The next one is also your augment. Your 2-1 augment is really crucial. Making sure that you know which augments are the best augments that you generally want to be taking when it comes to tempoing in the early game. Generally speaking, especially in the current balance at the moment on patch 17.1b, items are generally better than combat, which is generally better than econ when you're trying to specifically tempo and beat down the lobby, trying to create yourself a good, strong 5, if not 10 win streak. Next part is your game plan. Does tempoing actually make sense from your spot? Sometimes you will find yourself in a situation where you will have decently upgraded units and your board is pretty close to actually being able to tempo, but sometimes you will find yourself in a lobby where there is just a turbo high roller, somebody who gets like a Victor 2 on 2-1 with drone. If that's the case, the odds of you being able to tempo at all, even with your decently upgraded board, it's not high. If anything, it's probably 0, because at some point you will rotate into that player and you will lose your streak. So you got to make sure that you are scouting properly and gauging the strength of the lobby before you decide to jam a level on 2-1 and level to 4 to try to play for a streak. Another thing that I want to mention is also your upgrades. How many upgrades do you actually have? Are they high in unit quality? Unit quality is something we'll touch upon a little bit later, but that is a really important thing to note when it comes to your upgraded units. Your slams are really important as well. Can you slam anything in particular to make your spot a little bit better? Items like Sunfire Cape, items like Rabadons, JG, Void Staff. These are items that are like pretty strong in the early game, generally speaking, and you could try to slam these to try to make sure that you are able to secure a streak in the early game. If you are trying to tempo, you really do want to be able to slam items down if possible. That is going to be a really core fundamental when it comes to playing tempo. And finally, your pairs. Your strong pairs are super important to make sure that you actually have. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but also you got to make sure they make sense together. So for example, you wouldn't really care about having like a Cho'Gath pair if you have a Nasus 2 who is a Vanguard, right? Cho'Gath is a bruiser, in the current set. Having a Cho'Gath pair is almost meaningless because you know that the odds are you will be playing around Vanguards in the early game because you already have that Nasus 2, who is, first off, unit quality wise, just a much better tank than Cho'Gath is, but also line selection wise, it's just better in terms of like the meta lines that are currently meta at the moment at the time of recording this video. And also, it just doesn't make sense to be holding onto the bruisers when you already have the Vanguards ready, right? You already have your front line decided. Get rid of that Cho'Gath pair. Let's hold some other stuff instead to try to figure out our backline situation instead so that it all comes together nicely. So that being said though, let's actually talk about how to play tempo. Well, there are 3 parts generally speaking when it comes to tempo. The first part is making sure that you prep your lines properly, making sure that you know what lines are available to play from tempo and what to default to if you decide to tempo. In the current patch 17.1b, this means that generally speaking, if you're going to tempo, you're likely going to tempo into some AP flex. The second part of this is going to be also your ability to identify and scout. You have to constantly scout the lobby if you want to tempo. That is like severely crucial when it comes to actually tempoing in the game, because if you're not constantly scouting and making sure that your board is strong enough to continue your streak, you're negligence of scouting the lobby is going to cause you to lose your streak at some point, and you really want to be able to make sure to avoid that. And the best way to do that is to make sure you are able to identify how strong everybody else is from their current spots, and if they're going to become a problem later down the line. I'm gonna have my camera here for just a second just so you can show part 3. But part 3, making sure that you are executing the plan, but also don't overcommit to tempoing. Sometimes people will find other upgrades that are really strong and they will make you lose your streak. If that is the case, don't overcommit to like Bebe leveling or crazy leveling and then pushing an extra level of like severely off interval just because you think you must preserve your streak. Sometimes you will have to lose your streak, and your economy at that point is more important to preserve because that's what's going to be the vehicle to get you back into the game later down the line. Don't always force your tempo. You don't have to 15 streak every single game. Now, moving on, let's now talk about those 6 pieces we talked about a little bit earlier, and the first one being line selection. How does line selection actually affect our ability to tempo in the first place? Well, first off, your line selection, in case you don't know what that means, it just refers to which direction you want to take the game and which boards you'd like to end on. This kind of information and this kind of preparation should be done outside of the game. It prepares you for the game. If you do not prepare at all and you just try to tempo Timmy into every single game, I can promise you that as you climb up higher and higher up the ranks, it's going to become less and less effective. Because the reality is that the higher you climb up, not only are people becoming more efficient at building stronger boards, they know which boards, generally speaking, are just stronger flat out than other boards because the game is not always truly balanced. Therefore, you got to make sure that you understand which lines to lean on if you really want to make sure that you can play the game at a high enough level that you are consistently being able to tempo into strong lines in the current meta. This doesn't also mean that every single comp is tempo-able, if that makes sense. There are some lines that, for example, in this current patch, I'll use a couple examples, that require specific conditions in order to thrive. For example, the biggest and most obvious example is going to be Mech Voyagers. In patch 17.1b, that is a straight up win out line. And the reason it's a win out line is because despite the fact that the core comp by itself is honestly really dog shit and terrible and just not that good, when it's paired with the anima cash out trait and you get things like frost armor or really strong anima cash outs, you can actually then just straight up win the game because of the mechanic and the way that the composition works. Is that because you have a unit that takes up 2 slots and it's just this massive enormous thing, if you stat check it hard enough with the right anima or cash out items, you are able to then just straight up win out the entire game because you are just so strong as just basically stat checking every single board. That is a line that you cannot tempo into because you would not be able to get the cash out items in order to make that composition work. Therefore, you should never find yourself, for example, tempoing into AP flex and then finding yourself having to buy Ace Soul units trying to get some sort of AP flex board to work. That's just not how it works. You want to make sure that the lines you're tempoing into don't require such strict conditions. Comps that are flexible on items are generally going to be better to tempo into. Now, this isn't always going to be a true black and white statement, but for example, if a comp really requires 3 really specific items to do super well, chances are tempoing into that comp is not going to do you any favors because when you tempo into the line, especially, well, with the removal of carousel, it's a little bit different now, but even with the comeback mechanic in set 17, you are going to struggle to find the exact components you need because you either don't get carousel priority if we're talking about other sets, or in set 17, you won't get the correct component anvils or anvils at all, to be honest, and you're solely relying on RNG to get you the right items. So generally speaking, comps that are flexible on items are going to be better when it comes to tempoing. Now, that being said, you should really know your game plan. For example, if you're slamming 80 items, which lines are available to you, right? In the current patch right now, this would include things like Xayah, things like Rogues if you're playing around early Kai'Sas, Samira if 2 tanky on 3-2, Corki and Riven in a pinch, etc., right? You should know that if you're going to tempo into certain lines, you know that, like we talked about before, the items are fairly flexible, but also that these lines in general, when you tempo into them, that you can still secure pretty strong placements. Now, these boards, by the way, just so we're absolutely clear, tempo lines, generally speaking, do not win out lobbies. Like, this is, well, I was going to touch upon this a little bit later, but it's good to just bring it up real quick. But tempoing into a line generally means that you're not going to be able to win out the lobby. The reason being is that those players who are like straight up just losing like 10 10 rounds in a row and trying to completely go for that cash out and then win out, their board inherently on like just a purely strength level is probably going to be stronger than yours at the very end of the game, because they had sacked so much and played a high risk line, but they're looking for that high reward to win them out. And when you're tempoing in the early game, you're really betting that you are just hammering down people hard, and you're making it more impactful when they make mistakes and lose HP down the line, right? That is the whole idea behind tempoing. So when you choose these 4-cost lines, for example, that you are trying to tempo into, you want to make sure that these lines are still relatively strong within the meta, but generally speaking, these lines are probably not going to be the lines that completely win out lobbies, right? Like the ones that win out lobbies are things like your anima cash outs, or like your specific emblems that like really enable the crap out of certain comps, right? Stuff like that. If you're sending AP items, right, just to go back on the previous example, right, but like which lines are available to you, right? And in this patch currently, things like AP Flex, Nami Karma, or like Victor or Vex, Shepherd boards, Bronze for Life boards, Zoe, Lulu, Victor reroll, right? You can tempo into specific reroll lines. It's not like you necessarily can't, but it plays a little bit differently than if you were to normally just lose streak into a certain round and then start rolling then to stabilize. Instead, what ends up happening is that a very common example is like, for example, you're playing around like a Zoe 2. You have a super early Zoe 2. You're like, oh my god, stage 2 is over. I get to just like slam all my like AP items. Ba 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 ba. My Arbiter is pretty strong for LeBlanc. Life is good, right? But sometimes you scout the lobby, you go, oh my god, there's like 3 people who are angling LeBlanc. I can tell already based off their Gintu Void Staff slams on 3-1, and I see 3 people are angling it. What do we do? Well, in a situation like that, you have 100 HP, but instead of trying to actually keep pushing your levels and keep trying to be the first one to get to LeBlanc versus like the guy who's like 10 lossing and losing all of their HP for a crap load of economy to try to hit faster than you, go with Zoe. Just reroll the Zoe instead. You can do that as well, and that's totally okay. Again, all of this really boils down to making sure that you're scouting properly every round, so that not only can you make sure that you can continue your streak, but also so that you have a really strong understanding as to what is going on in the lobby. What is everyone angling, trying to play? Is anyone trying to pivot last second? What's going on, right? You want to make sure you are staying up to date and making sure you understand what everyone else is doing. The right-hand infographic, as you can see as well, it's, you know, compared to the previous slide and this slide, you can see a lot of like comps are X'd out, right? Because I know, like, looking at this, generally speaking, that these ones that aren't X'd out are lines that I could potentially tempo into. But the ones that are X'd out, because I know I did my prep, unless I find some sort of random like catalyst that can really enable these lines, there's almost no way I could ever tempo into these lines. And most of these, like the ASOL mech that we talked about before, completely unviable from a tempo spot. Another thing we want to talk about is the augment selection. Your augment selection should really fit within your line selection, but also help you streak, right? You could be missing a lot of board strength through your augments, which could cost you your entire game plan. Econ is much more acceptable if you think you have to mix streak with decent win streak potential. Like, for example, let's say you have a really strong upgraded front line, but your backline is it's missing an upgrade. It's missing that upgraded Timo 2. It's missing that Lissandra 2. It's missing something to really get that tempo online. Those are the situations where, like, you don't really want to open fort and just sell everything. That doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, you know that you have so much potential to get there, you're just missing that one extra upgrade. And if that's the case, sometimes you just have to understand that, you know what, maybe I'll just take the econ instead, because I know for a fact that unless I can eventually find this Timo and it's been like 3 or 4 rounds, instead, you know what, it might just be better that I just like take an econ augment on 3-2 and then just call it a day. On 2-1, it's a little bit more acceptable to take your items and then like hope that you can find that paired upgraded naturally, but it's not as common. It's definitely a bit more risky. Now, it's really important to note that if your streak breaks, you will be poor. That is like the big problem with tempoing in general, where it's really difficult to justify tempoing if your streak breaks, because what ends up happening is that a lot of money in your economy and hitting those early economic thresholds comes from streak money. That extra 1 or 2 gold per round, or 3 gold even per round, adds up a lot. And throughout the course of, you know, 5-10 rounds leading into stage 4, if you are not hitting those econ thresholds early or fast enough and being efficient with your economy, it's gonna be a tough time. And if you are trying to tempo with a board that isn't great at tempoing, that loss of streak money adds up. You start to miss the 30 gold threshold, that 40 gold threshold, that 50 gold threshold. You could have hit those thresholds, but you couldn't because you accidentally lost your streak going into neutrals, for example, right? It happens to all of us. So make sure that if you are going to streak, that you keep it going, or you're able to scout and identify that, hey, if leading into 3-2 you think that like it's not a really good odd that like your 5 streak is going to continue, maybe consider taking an econ augment then on 3-2 to make sure that you can then try to find your units later down the line if necessary, especially when playing around standard level level 8 boards. But again, generally on 2-1, if you're trying to play for tempo, things like items are much better than things like combat, just because the combat right now 2-1s are just kind of weak. And also econ is sort of like the way to go if you don't really have anything else to really tempo with. And at that point, maybe you're not really playing tempo, but econ is always just like a safe default. You can't really go wrong with taking econ on 2-1. I want to also highlight something as well. Items, particularly emblems, are incredibly strong throughout the early game as well. So emblems just have a lot of power built into them, not to mention the fact that they just unlock a trait for you. So there's a lot of power in those. So like Augment, specifically like trait tree, it's ranked super high on almost any pro tiers playlist, or not playlist, excuse me, Augment tier list, because it is so unbelievably powerful when you're trying to tempo with it, and it also gives you direction, which is super useful. But that is something to keep in mind, generally speaking. Now let's talk a little bit about upgrades and pairs. Not all pairs are equal. Your prep should really help dictate unit quality and direction. Now, unit quality is a bit of a difficult thing to try and tell you or explain to you, explain in general. Sorry, I don't know why sometimes when you speak multiple languages, you have like a word in a different language that does a better job of conveying the meaning of a message. Anyways, I'm getting off track. The unit quality is important because it's one of those things that you have to just build up experience over time to really nail down what a strong 1 cost feels like, or what a strong 3 cost is, or what is a good tank versus like a bad tank, right? That takes, honestly to God, it takes time to build up that information. So while it's true that you want to start like trying to think about, okay, how strong this unit is in a vacuum, what lines do they lead us into, and how well do they fit into the meta lines, and how does it fit into like meta reads and stuff, it's a very highly advanced, complex skill to be able to master. So I urge you to look at the tier list and look at what other people are saying and see how congruent it is to your own understanding, making sure that you are really thinking for yourself about what does it mean to be a strong 1 cost hold or a 2 cost hold, and what does that look like in practice, right? But this is really important, especially like when it comes to preparation in general, because knowing what pairs to keep not only signifies that you have an understanding of what is the meta right now and what you believe is strong, but also it helps you understand how to generate econ faster, because you know which units you don't really want to hold on to, or which ones you're more willing to let go in order to like hit those early like 10 gold, 20 gold thresholds, right? That is what's really important. Even as you can see on the screen, again, I'll hide my camera here so you can see, but as you can see, like based on my own understanding of the meta right now and the pairs that I have on my board, I have like a 3 Space Groove opener with an upgraded Nasus 2. I have like a Gwen pair. I can sell like things like the Poppy 2 because I'm not going to be playing around Bastions this game. I don't need the Ezreal or the Timebreakers. I'm probably going to tempo from this spot, and I could maybe even sell Meepsy if I don't want to play around Shepherds, right? There's a ton of different ways that we could go about this, and obviously inside of this contest you don't see the whole thing, but this is a spot where I could just make 10 because I know that I'm not going to be playing around any of these units, and I can make 10 despite the fact that I'm still playing tempo, when normally when playing tempo you kind of want to hold on to all of your options whenever possible, right? There we go. So talking about upgrades and pairs, excuse me, your prep should include knowing which units are better than others, and strong unit quality means your higher likelihood to tempo. And building plans around knowing which upgraded units are viable for tempo is a great way to build your own game plan. Now, I might be shooting myself in the foot here, but I want you to open up a tier list maker. Now, if you're already rolling your eyes, wait, don't skip. But if you are rolling your eyes and you're like, fuck this guy, I don't want to do an exercise right now, I don't want to think about it, fine. But for your own good, I'm giving you a chance here because I'm talking slow to potentially pause the video, open up a tab, open up TFT Academy or Tactics.tools or whatever or site you care about or that you like to use tier lists for. Open up the tier list unit builder and make a 1 cost tier list hold. I am urging you. I command you. I mean, I don't know if that's the correct word here, but like, I strongly suggest you do this. I really do. If just for a sec, you're here, you want to improve, buddy. Like, open the tier list builder and just create a tier list. What is the S tier 1 cost holds, the A tier 1 cost holds, the B, the C, and the D tier, whatever? Come back to this video and unpause after, because I'm gonna go to the next slide and this image is gonna be unblurred, and I want you to cross-reference your read with our read. This read was developed in our study group and in the mentor program as well, and one of the people working on this tier list was none other than rank 1 global Demacian Raptor, who hit like 2400 LP. right? And this guy he's coached Solo Gasong and like top pros as well, and he's constantly working with EUS pros, and their study group in general, by the way, have sent multiple, and I mean multiple people to Worlds, and honestly to the point where I've lost count. So I would highly urge you to really take some time and develop a tier list, and then come back and unpause the video. Okay, but that being said, I feel like I dragged this on enough. I'm going to go to the next slide, but feel free to compare your tier list with ours. And if you have any questions, please let me know about what holds are where and why. I just do want to make it clear though that in our tier list specifically, it's not like within the S tier, it's ranked specifically. Like Briar is not necessarily better than Teemo. Does that make sense? Like they're both S tier, but for us, like maybe Teemo's a little bit higher or lower depending on who you are and what your own personal opinions are. But this is like generally speaking our collective opinions. So if you have any questions on this, please let us know. But for example, Teemo is like just as an example, is like the best AP item holder right now. He's just such a strong unit, right? Lissandra's also really up there, really great, but just not as good as Teemo. Vanguards are the best right now just because our meta read is that like AP Flex is super strong right now, and that is a really great tempo line, especially if you're trying to tempo Timmy a lot of your games. Really strong holds that you want to consider. Obviously, Ezreal is great for Timebreaker, yada yada yada. You get the idea. But anyways, if you have any questions on it, feel free to ask, but I love to cross and compare with you guys. Let's talk now about slamming items. This is also really important and something that gets misconstrued a lot. One of the most common mistakes is slamming any and all items. This is not something you should do, contrary to what everybody tells you, right? I think a lot of pro players will give some really blanket statement advice that just says, slam your fucking items and figure it out later. And while it is true that if you play like that, you will learn a lot about the game. If you were a beginner or even an intermediate player who is still trying to get their feet wet, like maybe your peak rank was platinum or emerald or maybe even diamond, it is a pretty good idea to just slam shit and then figure it out, because it'll get you familiar by just testing stuff out, right? If you slam a Sterak's and a Titans, you should know what units like those items, right? In your head immediately, oh, Riven, Doi, right? Stuff like that should like immediately be popping up into your head. Like, oh, Rabadon's in JG, only AP, no mana gen, Victor. Like, that should make sense, right? This is like the best way to learn. But in practice though, you do not want to always do this. And the reason being is because, let's say for example, right now, in the current meta, AP Flex is sort of like the main go-to line right now. It's a good default to generally go for. That being said though, if AP Flex is the general way to go and AD Melee is not particularly that good at the moment, you probably should not be slamming a Sterak's on your Gwen 2 when you're trying to tempo. That doesn't make any sense, because theoretically speaking, you should be trying to slam more towards AP if you can, because you know you want to try to slam into that AP Flex line, especially if that's the direction you're trying to go to. Obviously, if AD Melee and like Riven was like the best forecast and it's so unbalanced, it's not even close, then yeah, slam that Sterak's, go for it. But your slams is going to be dictated by one, your direction, and that direction is two, based off the current meta read that you have personally developed. So making sure that when you are slamming your items, you are keeping that in mind, right? Generally speaking, your slam should be good enough to fit into your line, like right off rip onto one. You should be pretty content with slamming something. If that's not the case, you should really be careful before actually slamming your items. Now, the final stuff I want to talk about is conservative placements. This is the one thing I think some people get like really mistaken and they get confused about when it comes to playing tempo, and I want to talk about it real quick. First of all, tempo Timmy playstyle is all about going for conservative placements. Those players who like to be lose streaking in the early game, be lose streak losers, if you will, right? And they want to basically like 5 loss, 10 loss into like the first 2 stages of the game, they're open for it, and then they just go for like a massive high octane pivot to try to win out the game. The players that are able to succeed and higher elo, they will succeed because they will only play like that in specific spots that they know are good for those specific decisions. But that being said though, those players are the ones that will likely win out. So when it comes to tempo Timmy, unless you're super high rolling your line, chances are you're going to be aiming for conservative placements. Most of the time, you're looking for tempoing from like top 2s to top 5s. That's like the general gist. If you are tempo Timmy often and you're constant, and you're like let's say you go on like a 3-game loss streak, but you went 5-5-5, sometimes that can genuinely just be attributed to just matchmaking. Obviously, there's probably a ton of mistakes you are making, but a lot of the time, if you're going like top 2 to 5th, like honestly, a 5th is not that bad. Like it's honestly like out of the bot 4s, it's S tier. You know what I'm saying? So any top 4 is a good top 4 when you're trying to tempo Timmy. And don't expect to always go first if you decide to tempo into a game. More often than not, you will likely be able to just play, like, for example, AP flex, but then you'll probably be bleeding out until like a second, a third, or a fourth, or sometimes if you're very unlucky, into a fifth. Another thing to point out is that it's a very difficult playstyle. This playstyle is hard. When you try to execute this playstyle and something goes wrong, maybe somebody just high rolls something out of nowhere, or maybe you are trying to execute it but then you scouted improperly and you just didn't see somebody who was super strong that you just didn't realize, but you didn't see the items on their bench, or you misidentified the units on their board. If that's the case, it can be really difficult to recover. Your streak is your money. That is where your money comes from. So if you cannot streak, you will be poor, and therefore you become really and significantly more reliant on finding econ augments when that is the case. If you don't find those, the game gets very hard. So I highly recommend that when it comes to this playstyle, I'm gonna hide my camera so you can read this, but take your time to perfect it and learn it. Execution takes time to perfect. Even challenger players struggle to gauge their board strength or tempo spots correctly. And this kind of improvement for this playstyle is going to take a lot of dedicated repetition before you're able to really succeed playing tempo style. But that is basically going to do it for this video. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Tomorrow, I do plan on releasing a VOD review, which is going to specifically be a game that I played from a tempo spot. And we can talk a bit more about the decision making in the early game and what leads to why you decide to play tempo and how that can execute into a perfect game. I think this is just a little bit too long of a video, so I'm just going to cut it here. But again, if you have any questions in the comments, please leave them down there, and I will see you all soon. I will answer any questions as soon as I can. Take care, guys. Happy clapping.